Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Bava Kamma daf Tzadik Aleph. Let me share my screen and we will get started. So yesterday, we raised the topic of assessing the object that damaged or killed someone. We had this interesting debate, interesting discussion between Shimon HaTimni and Rabbi Akiva, and we noted that Shimon HaTimni had said that we need to, that when you evaluate, just as you evaluate a fist, you evaluate a stone. Now, separately, the Gemara sort of is going to now assume this concept is necessary in connection with capital cases. That when you have, what we don't want to have happen is somebody, throws a feather onto somebody, and then that turns out that feather, which no one would have ever thought would hurt the person, ends up killing the person. And so we don't want that person to go to, we don't want the perpetrator, the quote unquote perpetrator in that case, to be killed. And so as a result, we have this rule that you evaluate whether or not the object that caused the damage is in fact the kind of object that would normally cause that kind of damage. And so we do an assessment. And so now we're going to ask the following question. Do we do these kinds of assessments only in capital cases, or do we also do it in cases involving damages? And if you're saying, well, 1 second, we already learned, Shimon HaTimni says that we do it in damage cases, you're absolutely right. And of course, that will be the last of 4 proofs that we try and bring to show that, in fact, you do it also in damage cases. But let's go through the process until we get back to Shimon HaTimni. So Ibailahu, they asked the question.
Where are you?
So now, we are at the 2 dots of fifth to last narrow line. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 lines down on Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph. So Ibailu.
You gotta fix your microphone. It's not transmitting well.
That's so strange. I'm not doing anything different than usual. Can you hear better now?
There's a little bit of some static.
All right. Well, it's not. I don't hear any static on from you. So I don't know whether maybe it's an issue with your speakers, but make sure your volume is up and let's get going. So all right. So Ibailahu, they asked a question. Yesh Omer L'Nizakin. When it comes to damages, do we do this kind of assessment? Do we say that maybe it's only for capital cases that we say that when somebody gets killed that we perform that kind of evaluation? Because that's, that in fact through this item, it made sense for the person to have lost their life. Because and in another case, it doesn't make sense for the person to have lost their life as a result of the item. But it doesn't make a difference. As long as there's any kind of ability to do damage, maybe we'll say that you don't need any kind of evaluation. It's just tough luck. You have to pay the damages. Odoma Loshna. Or do we say, no, there's no difference between these 2 cases. We're going to require we're going to require an evaluation in all situations. So we're going to have 4 efforts to bring a proof. The first 3 will be unsuccessful. The last will be Shimon HaTimni. So Tashma, Ma bor sheyesh bo kedei lahamis asara tvachim, that when it comes to a pit, it has to have 10 tvachim depth in order for it to be able to cause death. Av kol sheyesh bo kedei lahamis asara tvachim. So too, any kind of situation of causing somebody to fall requires 10 tvachim in order for there to be death. And if it's less than 10 tvachim, and an animal fell into it and died, patur. So then it's exempt. But if the animal is damaged, chayav, then it would be then there would be liability. That when we say that anything less, it means from 0 to 10, that they were covering the entire, from nothing to the top of the amount. Kamma mitefach adas v'adas sara misaleka. When you go from 1 tefach until 10 tvachim, there's not death. The nizakin hika, but there is liability. Amal and nizakin koldu, even any kind of amount will result in damages, and you don't need to therefore do any kind of assessment. Shmamina ain't omdim l'nizakin, so that shows that assessments is not needed. Lo, no. When we say that 10 doesn't cause damage, but then 10 causes death, and 9 doesn't cause death but only causes damage, what we're saying is counting down. It's not saying from 0 to 9 or 0 to 10 will cause damage. V'hakikamar asara misaika pachas masara purta nizakanisa. That when you have exactly 10, so then there's going to be liability for death. But when you have a little less than 10, so then 9.9, so then nizakin isa, then there's damage, but misaleka, but there's no liability for death. So olam a malach yesh omen l'nizakin, and really we could say that for anything less than just under 10, you need to have some kind of evaluation as to whether or not that level of fall could cause the level of damage that was created. And in each situation, we need to know that it was enough that could be damaged through it. So that was effort number 1, and it was unsuccessful. Now, and that was an effort to show that you don't need any kind of assessment, any kind of evaluation of the estimation of the item that caused the damage. Now we're going to try 3 times to show that you do need it, and the 3rd time will be successful. Tashma hiko al eino v'simo. If you cause somebody, if you hit somebody, and you cause them to become blind, al ozno v'chersho, or you hit them on the ear and you cause them to become deaf. If it's an eved yotze behen l'cheves, a slave goes free. However, keneged eno and eno ro'eh, and take a look in Rashi. It's keneged eno. It's basically opposite the last of the narrow lines in the Gemara. Keneged eno. Hiko b'kotel. When we say that you hit opposite the eye, it doesn't mean opposite the eye and on the body, but rather you hit the wall. Keneged eno shelzeh. So if somebody happens to be looking at the wall and you slam your hand into the wall right next to their, right in front of their vision, and then all of a sudden, as a result of that slam, it so shocks them that it shocks them into being unable to see. Keneged ozno, or opposite their ear, ve'eno shomeya, and they're not unable to hear. Ein eved yotze behen l'cheres. That is not enough to cause the slave to go free. My taima. What's the reason? La mishum debe'inan umdana. Isn't it because we need some kind of assessment, and our assessment of this kind of hitting of a wall next to an eye or an ear is not sufficient to cause damage to the slave. Ushmamina yesh omdana l'nizakin, and so we see that there is a requirement for assessment. No, that's not necessarily the case. Mishum damrin, who of is nafshe, we say that he's the one who caused himself the problem. Kiditanya, as we see in the following brisa, mavit es favero. If you startle somebody, if you scare someone, pater medine adam b'chaya b'dine shemayim. So you're liable in heaven, but you're exempt in the court of man. Ketzad, give me an example. Taka ba'azno v'chersho. If you, obviously this taka is clearly not meant to be hitting, but rather you blew into, or you yelled into blew a shofar next to somebody's ear, and he became deaf. Patur, you're exempt. However, if you actually grab the guy and make him and force him to not to listen to your yelling in his ear, well then chayav, because then you've actually interacted with him. Okay, go have a seat. chayav. Then you'll be chayav. So the bottom line is that we see. Hold on, we'll do it later. So we see that in this particular case, right? The okay, Mark. We see that in this particular case, that one who scares somebody is not, if they don't touch the person, they're not going to be liable, because scaring somebody is not a method of we're going to put some level of responsibility on the one who got scared. That there is a reasonable reaction to being scared and an unreasonable reaction to being scared. And so this is going to be an unreasonable reaction to being scared. Okay, so that's effort number 2. So we're going to now try a third time. And again, we're going to try and say that brisa that says that there is a requirement for umdana, there is a requirement for evaluation, even when there's just damages and not death. Tashma chamisha dvarim. Right, we have a brisa that says we have to pay if you damage somebody, a person. You have to pay 5 different forms of damage. Om denoso benosin lo miyad, and we say that we're going to assess the victim and give him the money immediately. And we say that you have to pay them. Ripoy v'sheves ad sheyisrapeh. And what is the amount that we assess? We assess the amount of healing payments that are necessary and unemployment that's necessary for the person to be healed. So, for example, if in fact it's going to cost $1,000 for somebody to get the medications that they need, and it's going to cost, and they're going to be out of work, and they get paid, $10,000 a week for 2 weeks. So then they're going to get paid, and the estimation is that it's going to take 2 weeks for them to be able to go back to work. So then they get paid $20,000 for the unemployment and $1,000 for the healing. So I'm due, but if things got worse as after they estimated his value, well then tough luck on the person who got sick, because you're not going to get paid anything more. So you only give him what he is estimated to be due. Amadu of a hivri. And on the other hand, if they estimated him and he got better faster, nozen lo kol masha amadu, they still give him the full amount, because they still give him the full amount, because that's what was assessed that he was likely to be required. So shma mina yesh omen l'nezakin. So doesn't this show that there's an estimation associated with damages? Here we're doing an estimation, so it shows that there's an estimation with damages. No, the Gemara points out, because what was the estimation that we're asking about? The estimation that we're asking about is about the object that did the damage. But what's the estimation that's in this case? In this case, it's the estimation of the victim, of how much he was damaged. So Lamema Gavra, when it comes to figuring out the person, Kamma Liktsar Meha Maka, how long he's going to be unable to work for this. Kamma lo miktsar, and how long he's not going to be unable to work, meaning when is he going to be able to work? Lo kama ba'ilon. That's not our question. Devade amdina. And everybody knows that in that situation you need some kind of evaluation and appraisal. Ki kama ba'ilon. Where do we have the question? Lemei marchefza. When it comes to the object that was involved in the attack. Oh, Ovid high nizka olo. Ovid high nizka olo. Whether it does this kind of, whether that object would do this kind of damage or not. So what's the story with that? So Tashma number 4, and now we quote Shimon HaTimni, who we brought yesterday. Shimon HaTimni Omer ma egrov miyuchat shemasur le'edav le'edim. That when it comes to a fist, because our Torah says that it's whether if you hit somebody with a fist or a stone and they don't die, that you're going to have to pay certain damages for them. So and that'll be next week's parsha, I believe. So that reference that says that we have a grove, that it's a fist. So av kol miyuchad shemasur la'edav la'edim. So to everything, the stone as well needs to be something that can be judged by the court and the witness. Well, even though Rabbi Akiva disagrees with respect to the need for the court to be able to approximate it, they do need it for at least the witnesses to have seen it. So Shema Mina Yesh Omer L'Nezakin. So the bottom line is we see that there is assessment when it comes to damages, Shema Mina. So yes, in fact, this is a good proof. Now, in the course of our third attempt at answer, we cited a brisa, and the Gemara is going to now quote that brisa. So Amar Mar Amadu Behivri Nosan Lo Kol Masha Amaduhum. So when we see that if the person gets healed, they give him the full amount, and it doesn't make a difference whether or not the person ends up getting sicker or gets better faster. It does that we go based on the estimation. Messiah Leila Rava. This supports Rava. The Amar Rava. If they estimated somebody was going to be out of work for an entire day, the idpa lepalga de yoma, and it turns out that he got better in the middle of the day, and and was able to do his work. Yavin and laid the kula yoma, he still gets the full day's pay in terms of the shevet, because min shemaya hu derachamei, that we just say that it was heaven that had rachamim on him and that he was able to get better faster. So that is our first opening topic of the day. Now the Mishnah is going to talk about spitting, right? We said that you had to spit on a person in order for them to get this embarrassment payment, because it's very embarrassing to be spat on. Very embarrassing to be spat on. So rakak v'higiabo harok v'ha'avir, right? If you spit on somebody and it reaches him, or v'havir, you take off some clothing that's on him, you're going to have to pay 400 zuz in damage. Let's focus on the spitting for the moment. So Amarav Papa, lo shanu elabo. When we say that you have to spit on a person in order for him to be liable, it means spitting on the person, spitting on the person, and it actually hitting his body, his physical body, so his face, any kind of his body. Aval vigdo, low. If it only gets to his clothing, that's not enough to be liable. Well, one second, why not? If it hits his clothing, it's still embarrassing. So why not let that be an issue? So Amre b'ma'arava mishmei Rabbi Yossi bar Avin zozo omeres. I'm sorry, nehevi biyash b'dvarim. Right. So the question is I don't understand. Let it be at least like words. Meaning, if I embarrass a person with words, that can't be any less bad than spitting and the spit actually hitting the person, just not on his body but on his clothing. So, and presumably at the moment we're assuming that if you humiliate somebody with words, you're going to have to pay the damages. So Amri, as a result of this question, we actually say B'ma'arava, we say in Israel, Mishmei de Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, in the name of Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, Zozomeris, that this teaches Bishu bidvarim pater miklum. You don't have to pay anything if you embarrass somebody with words. Now, again, embarrassing somebody is terrible, and it's a big avera, it's a big sin. But you would not be liable for any damages associated with it. Now, okay. So next, so that is the story with embarrassing. So now the question is, our Mishnah mentioned that everything depends on the victim's honor. So I'll call Lafi Kvodo. So Ibailahu, they asked, Tanakama Lakula Ka'amar or Lachumra Ka'amar? When the Tanakama said that everything is based on the honor of the victim, was he saying something to be strict or to be lenient? So, and now we're going to explain. Lakula Ka'amar, was he being lenient? Te'ika ane delo boy lemishkal kulihai, because we had said that you get 400 zuz, for example, if you spit on somebody. So is that saying 400 is the most? And then if in fact the person was a poorer person and therefore not less deserving, we would end up giving him less. Or maybe he's saying actually to be stricter, that 400 is the minimum. But if the person was really wealthy, he deserves more than that. So Tashma, come in here. So Amar Rabbi Akiva, since Rabbi Akiva says immediately after the Tana Kamma says Hakol Afik Fodo, Rabbi Akiva says Afilu Aniyim Shibi Yisrael Ronotan Ki'ilu Haim Bnei Chorin Shiyardu Min, that we actually view the poor as if they had assets but they lost them, meaning that they were totally Bnei Chorin. They defined Bnei Chorin here as aristocrats, excuse me. But the point is that it can also be free people is Bnei Chorin. But the bottom line is that they have lost their wealth. Shehem and why do we treat them as the aristocrats? Why do we treat them as important? Shehem Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, because they are the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. All right. So, but what does that come and teach us? It points out that what Rabbi Akiva is saying is, you Tana Kamma thought that we should actually pay less because maybe people have lower standards if they're poor. And I'm going to tell you, no, we're going to give the same standard. So Shema Mina, Tana Kamma L'Kula Ka'amar, that the Tana Kamma, when he said about everything depends on the honor, it was referring to a leniency, that if the victim had a lower status, so then he would get paid less. So Shema Mina. In fact, that is an accurate reading and a reasonable teaching. Okay, so the Mishnah then said, hey, what about, then gave us the story of the person who took off the head covering of a woman, and then he asked for time in order to show that this was this woman didn't really care about the situation. So why did Rabbi Akiva say that you could have time? That's the question that we're going to ask. So, do we give people time to pay? Rabbi Chanina, that we don't give time for people to pay off the injuries. They have to pay everything right away. No. The Gemara explains, Kilo Yabinam Lileizman. When is Rabbi Chanina's statement that we don't give time for people to pay the damages of injuries? That's when there's an injury that causes a loss of money. When it comes to humiliation, the low chasri mamona, where there is no reduction in money, people don't lose money as a result of their embarrassment. Yavinan, there we will give time. So that's why Rabbi Akiva was more flexible in this situation to give the person who is liable, time to have to pay. Shmara omedes al pesach chatzera. Now we mentioned that the perpetrator then stood at the door of her courtyard and waiting for her to come out, and then poured out the oil so that she would then show her hair even in public and show that she was willing to humiliate herself. But Tanya, but 1 second, we have a brisa. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, salalta b'mayim adirim v'helisa cheres biyadcha, that you have dived into mighty waters and brought up a piece of pottery in your hand. But what is that? What is this teaching? Adam rashai l'chavo ba'asmo. A person is allowed to wound himself. But 1 second, in our Mishnah, when we had Rabbi Akiva's statement, we eventually made the point that one is not allowed to wound oneself. So it seems like there's a contradiction within Rabbi Akiva. One place he says you can wound yourself, and one place you can't. So Amarava, lo kasha, there's no problem. Kan b'chavala, kan b'voshes. One case is dealing with with an actual wound. That's what you're not allowed to do to yourself. And kan b'voshes, and one case is dealing with humiliation that you are allowed to do to yourself. But 1 second, our Mishnah itself is talking about embarrassment. So why would why would that be permitted? So, how can we say that this works as we turn to Tzadik Aleph and Bet? So, v'katani hachova ba'atzmo afal pi she'eno rashai patur. If a person wounds himself, even though it's not allowed, he is not liable. So, halchi kamar. No, this is what Rabbi Akiva was saying to the person. Lomi bai boshes. Certainly, when it comes to, it doesn't even need to require saying with respect to embarrassment. The adam rashai lebayesh asmo, that a person can embarrass himself. Elafilu chavala. Even when it comes to wounding, the ein adam rashai lechabol ba'atzmo, where a person is not allowed to wound himself. If somebody else wounds him, he is still, that other person is liable. The ein adam rashai lechabol ba'atzmo. One second, are you telling me that a person's not allowed to wound himself? But Tanya, we got another brisa that seems to suggest that you can. If this person swears to do harm to himself, and he did it not harm himself, and that because again, there's a rule that if you make an oath and you don't fulfill the oath, then you are going to be punished. So Yehei Patur, that you might have thought that if you swore to harm yourself and you didn't harm yourself, that you're not going to be liable for that kind of failure to fulfill the oath. Talmud Lomar, Lahara Olahetev. The Torah says in Vayikra Parakeh Pasuk Dalit that it's whether you do good or do bad or do good. So Mahatava Rishus, just as doing good to yourself refers to things that you have permission to do but aren't necessarily required to do. Avhara Rishus. So to the bad things that we're referring to are situations where you have the ability to do it and not that it's prohibited to do. Avi nishba. So avi nishba lahara ba'atzmo v'lo hera. So as a result, it includes somebody who swears to do harm to himself and then doesn't do it. So doesn't this brisa show that it's permitted to harm oneself? So Amar Shmuel be'esha betanis. The kind of harm that we're talking about is where a person says, I'm going to sit and do a fast. And so as a result, the point is he's refraining from an action. And so as a result, and yet that's going to be the harm that he's doing to himself. And so everything is fine because that kind of harm you would be allowed to do it to yourself. It's just physical harm that you would not be allowed. But that's a problem because the kabasa gabi haras acherim. This brisa that we just cited also talks about harming somebody else, and it's the hashivam betanis, and so acherim mimosiv lehu betanisa. So, but if you're saying that this is talking about getting them to fast, how do you force somebody else to fast? So, you can force somebody else to fast. The mahadik lehu be'induruna. That you force them to stay in a particular room. You lock them in a room. And so as a result, without any food. And so as a result, you can in fact swear to force somebody to fast. But 1 second, we have again, that same brisa says that what's the definition of harming somebody else? Aket ploni. I'm going to hit him. The efza es mocho. And I'm going to cause a wound in his head. So that's the kind of wound that we're talking about. So how can you possibly say that we've been talking about fasting when it's clear from the end of that brisa that we're talking about a physical injury? So we're going to revisit the answer and actually say, what's the story? The fact is that there is a dispute among the Tanaim. El Tanaihi. There's an argument about Tanaim. That there's one Tana who says that you're not allowed to hurt yourself, and that was the one cited by Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah. And then there's another Tana that says, and Rabbi Akiva cites that person as well in a different that we cited in the Brisa, and that person says, that Tana says you're allowed to wound yourself. So Montana Deshamas lay Damar Ain Adam Rashai Lechabal Batsbo. Who's the one who says you can't? Ile Mahai Tanahu. You want to say that maybe it was Rabbi Lazar in the following brisa. That's not going to work because we'll see. Tanya, I'm gonna, your blood of your souls I will demand. This is referring to somebody who commits suicide. Rabbi Lazar says, Miyad nafsho sechem edrosh estimchem. From the hand of your souls, I will demand your blood. Meaning, if God forbid anybody hurts themselves or kills themselves in this particular case, Hashem is going to say that Hashem is going to require some level of liability from you. So Vidilma Katola Shiny, maybe killing yourself is different from just wounding yourself. Ella, so as a result, that's not a definitive proof. So Ella Hai Tanahu. Maybe it's the Tana again. Maybe it's again. The irony is that it's again we're going to cite it as potentially a Rebbe Lazar. And so here maybe it's Rebbe Lazar in the following brisa. The Tanya Makarin al Hames. You're allowed to tear your clothing. In fact, we do tear our clothing. We tear our clothing when we hear about somebody passing away if they're a relative. The lo mordarche hamori, and it's not considered a non-Jewish, an Amorite practice. Amar Rabbi Lazar says, Shamati shama kareya al hames yoser midai. If you tear more clothing than is necessary, loka, that person deserves lashes. Mishum bal tashkas, because you have violated the prohibition of bal tashkas, of not destroying. V'kol shekain gufo. And so now the Gemara adds, if in fact you're not allowed to destroy your clothing, for sure you can't hurt yourself. So we answer, no, that's not actually a good kal v'chomer. Because v'dilma begadim shiny, maybe clothes are different. Dipseda delo hadar bahu. Because when it comes to your body, if you injure it, that God willing, your body will heal itself. But when it comes to clothing, that's irreversible. So kihad de Rabbi Yochanan kare lemaini mekabdusa. This is like Rabbi Yochanan, who used to call his clothing the objects that honor him. But Rav Chisda went further. Kad hava masage bine hizmei vihige. When he was going to walk, whenever he would walk among thorns and thistles, midlay lahu lamane, he would lift the hem of his clothing and allow his physical legs to be cut up by the thorns. And Amar, and he would say, Zem mala arucha, this is going to heal. But the other is not going to heal. And that's why, because clothing was so expensive, people only had one piece of clothing. So as a result, that's why, he would, allow himself to be cut rather than harm his clothing. Ella, so therefore we show that is not going to be a definitive proof. And so we go try again. Ella hai tanahu. It's this Tana. The Tanya, Rabbi Lazar HaKapar Berebi, Rabbi Lazar HaKapar, who is honored with the title of Berebi, Ma Talmud Lomar, B'chipir Alav Asher Chata Al Hanefesh. Then what is the Torah teaching when it says, and he shall atone for him for having sinned against his soul? That this is referring to a Nazir. And so the point is that the Nazir has to bring a sin offering. So why does he have to bring a sin offering? Ella shetzir atzmo min hayayin. The reason is, according to Rabbi Lazar Kapar, because you deprived yourself of wine. The Nazir deprived himself of wine. V'halo dvarim kal v'chomer. And as a result, we can make a kal v'chomer. Uma zeh shelo tzir atzmo ela min hayayin. That when somebody only deprives themselves of wine, and they're going nikra chote, the person's going to be called a sinner. If you try and prevent yourself from having anything, i.e., you fast, al achas kamma v'kamma, even more so, you should be considered a sinner. So now the Gemara, all right, so as a result, we see that it's Rabbi Lazar HaKapar that is the one who says that you cannot damage yourself because you're not even allowed to deprive yourself of benefits from this world. So now the Gemara touches on the last of the topics. We said hakotzer. Oh, 1 second. I'm running out of power. Hold on just a second. Let me quickly get my. Sorry about that. Okay, so picking up with that Kotis Natiosav, 1 second. We're at the 2 dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines up. Hakotas Natiosav. So we said in our Mishnah that if in fact you cut down saplings so that you're not allowed to do so if they belong to you, but if others do so, you're liable. So Tana, so this is an important Gemara in connection with the topic of Baal Tashkas, that we don't ruin things that are good, and it's also an important Gemara in connection with the concept of tearing down trees, especially trees that are fruit trees, which again is something that was prohibited in the Torah. So Tana Rebbe Rabba Bar Chana Kamei de Rab. So Rabba Bar Chana taught in the presence of Rab, Shori Haragta. If you killed my somebody who says you killed my ox, Natiosai Katsatzta, you cut down my plantings, Ata Amarta Li Lahargo. And the person responds, you told me to kill it. Ata Amarta Li Lakotso. You told me to cut it down. Patur. The person is exempt. So this was a brisa, again, that Rav Bar Chana taught in the presence of Rav. So Rav says to him, Amar Leim Kain, Lo Shavakta, Lo Shavkat Chaye Libriasa. Kol Kamine, I'm sorry, Lo Shavkat Chaye Libriasa. 1 second, you have not left any space for people to live, meaning that for creations to live, because essentially any kind of damage that ever happens, a person will be able to say, hey, you told me to do it, and then be not liable. So Oh, Kamine, is that really within the power of a person to make that claim? So Amrle, Ismiye, should I delete this brisa? So Amrle, lo. No, Rav says you don't need to delete the brisa. You could do the following: Tasar game masnisach bishur haomed lahariga. We could say that we're talking about ubeilan haomed lekatzisa. We could say that we're talking about an ox that is subject to the death penalty, and a tree that is waiting to be cut down. Rashi explains what kind of tree that we're talking about that is waiting to be cut down. Ashira tree. It's an idol tree. Oh, kol eitz hanota l'rishus harabim, or some kind of tree that's leaning into rishus harabim. Umisyare shema yipol al adam b'yamos, and we're worried that it's going to fall on somebody and kill him. So in those situations, we are. That's where we're talking about. That maybe that's where a person would say, hey, you cut down my tree, you killed my ox, you shouldn't have done that. And yet, if the person says you told me to, you won't be liable. Well, ihachi, my katainle, if that's the situation where the ox needed to be killed and the tree needed to be cut down, why would you ever think that the defendant would be liable? To amrle, ana beina lemi'aved ha mitzvah. Because what the owner is saying is, I wanted to do the mitzvah myself. Tanya, because we have a brisa that teaches that if you steal somebody's mitzvah, then you are liable. The shafach b'chisa, the Torah tells us with respect to animals, to one who slaughters kosher birds or undomesticated kosher animals, that you need to cover the blood. And so it says, and you spill the blood, and then you cover the blood. So Misha Shafach Yichasa, that wherever the person is the one who spilled it, is the one who should be able to have the opportunity to cover it. So one time this person slaughtered the animal, and his friend covered the blood. And the Rabban Gamliel said to the friend that you needed to pay the other guy, the person who did the slaughtering, 10 gold dinars because you took away his mitzvah. So Amarav, Dikla, Ditan, and so as a result, that would be the requirement here as well. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to qualify the prohibition to cut down trees. So we have a pretty broad prohibition to cut down trees, but we're going to see that actually we can narrow it in some ways. So
it would apply to trees that are in his possession. Initially, the statement that you're going to destroy the world creature, the world of all its creatures, one would think that someone could give a command to someone, go knock down that tree in Chicago, this one, that one. But if it's in his possession, why wouldn't he have the right to tell us to invite someone or pay someone to do it in my yard? It belongs to him. It doesn't belong to the whole world.
No, absolutely, and it does. The person does have that right. The issue is that if we allow the defendant to make that claim, then nobody will ever be prevented from chopping down anyone's tree, because everybody can make that exact same claim that, oh, you told me to do it. And so as a result, that's exactly the point that we're saying. It's not on the ability of the owner that we're questioning, do you have the power? It's on the ability of the defendant to say, hey, you told me to do it. Because if we allow a defendant to say, hey, you told me to do it, then then defendants in all kinds of cases are going to be able to say, hey, you told me to do it.
Well, he has to bring some sort of proof, doesn't he?
Well, I think the Hava Amina is that no, he didn't need to bring any proof. That all he that's the whole point, is that the case seems to be that alone was sufficient, and that's why we're going to have to say that we're talking about a case where the ox was awaiting execution, and the tree was waiting to be cut down. So there's now, even though there's no witnesses, we'll say that because there's a basis to believe the story, we have some reason to think that in fact the owner would say that. In those situations, we'll allow the person to will allow the defendant to say, you told me to, and become not liable.
Sounds
Yes.
like a he said, she said case then.
100%. It is a he said, she said situation.
Sure,
Go ahead.
there's other issues, for example, and this is above that, if you will. In the time of war, if a commanding officer says to a lower rank, I need you to shoot or execute thee, and the lower ranking soldier says, but they did nothing wrong.
Right.
You know, how can you order me to do that?
Yeah. No,
I'm sure the Torah speaks about that.
yes, 100%. Obviously, yeah, there is that kind of ability, and indeed, even in the Israeli army today, there's responsibility on each soldier to recognize their duties under international law. So 100%. So all right, but in any event, the bottom line is that we have these rules that effectively said you can't cut down trees. So we're going to now note the fact that there are situations that you can. So Amar Rab Dikla Datan Kaba Asr Lemiktseh. That when we say that you can't cut down a fruit tree, we're saying that it's only if for example, a palm tree that has a kav of production, of date production, then it's going to be, that's enough production that we're going to say that you can't cut it down. So Meisve Kamma Yehe Kazayas, how Kamma Yehe Bezayas below Yiktsu. How much does there need to be for an olive tree in order to not be cut down? Rova, a quarter of a kav. Well, 1 second. So that's a different amount than the kav that Rav said. And of course, this is a Mishnah that says it. It's a Mishnah in Shavias. And we say that you're not allowed to cut it down if there's a rova. So shiny zayzim de chashibi, the olives are different because they're more valuable. So Amar Rabbi Chanina, lo shachiv shivchas beri ela dekatz te'inasa below zimna. And indeed, Rabbi Chanina says that his son Shivchas died early. He died, young, because he cut down a fig tree prematurely. And so that's why this statement is a reason to be very, very careful about not cutting down fruit trees. So Amar Ravina, imahaya mu'ula bedamim mutter. However, if the tree is worth more in wood value as cut down than it is as a fruit or a food producing tree, then mutter, it would be permitted to cut it down. And Tanya Namihaku, we have a brisa that shows this. Rak eitz asher teda, in the Torah, where it talks about the prohibition of destroying trees when besieging an enemy city. This is in Dvarim Perek Kaf Pasuk Yud Tet. It says, "Rak eitz asher teda ki lo eitz ma'achal Hu oso tashchis v'charata. That only a tree that you know that is not a food tree, that is the tree that you can cut down. All right, so we're going to break that pasuk down. So only a tree that you know rak eitz asher teda ze ilan machal. That refers to a food tree that you can't cut down a food tree. Kilo eitz machal hu, and that it's not and that it does a non-food tree. Ze ilan srak, that refers to a non-food tree. So in the end, this pasuk can be understood to be saying that you can't cut down everything. I'm sorry, you can cut down everything. That you can cut down food trees and non-food trees. So Maltal Melomer Kilo Eitz Machal. Well, what is it telling us? Why does it say not a food tree? Why not just tell us that it can even cut down food trees? Lahaktim Srak Lamachal. What it's telling us, according to this brisa, is that you should cut down non-food trees before you cut down food trees. Now, this brisa continues as we turn to Tzadik Bet Amud Aleph. Yachol afilu me'ula b'damim. I might have thought that a prioritization of non-food trees over food trees is true, even when the food tree is more valuable as food as wood than it is as fruit as food. So Talmud Lomar rak. So the Torah tells us rak, the limitation rak. So that shows that in fact, whenever a tree is worth more as wood than it is as a fruit producing tree, you're allowed to cut it down. And now we have two stories. So Shmuel that involve cutting down fruit trees. Shmuel Aitile Arise Tamre. So Shmuel's sharecropper brought him some dates. Achel time behu time of dechamra, and he tasted them, and he tasted some wine in them, meaning that the grapes seem to have seeped into the taste of the dates. Amrle, my high. Why does it taste like this? So Amrle, Beni Gufne Kaime. It's because these date trees are around grapevines. So Amar, so Shmuel said, wow, if the grapes are losing so much of their taste to this, the wine is being impacted so much. Lamakar aitili mukaraihu. So go get me the roots of these date trees. I want to see the roots of these date trees. I want to know that you've not just cut it down above ground, but you've pulled out the entire thing, because these date trees are ruining our wine. Rav Chisda chazet tale begufne. Rav Chisda saw some young palm trees around his grapevines. Amar leila arise. So he told his sharecropper, Akrinu, uproot them. Guvne kane dikle lo kane guvne. When it comes to grapevines, the produce will allow you. This is Rashi's interpretation. Let's translate it literally, and then we'll look at Rashi inside. And with that, we'll close. Guvne kane dikle, that vines can acquire date palms, but date palms cannot acquire vines. So what does that mean? Look at the last line of Rashi. Gufne kane dikle midimei hayayin. Using the money from the wine, Yecholin anu liknos karkaos. We can buy other land. The ilu dikle, but when it comes to dikle, when it comes to the dates of palms, lo kani gufne, you wouldn't be able to use that proceeds to buy vines, to buy a vineyard. Ein shavchan ola ela davar muad, because it's only worth a little bit. So as the result, that is why you are allowed to cut down those palm saplings, those baby date trees. So with that, we're now going to note that we've been discussing compensation, but our next Mishnah is going to note that that is not all that is required of the damagers. But for the details of what else is required, please stay tuned to tomorrow's daf.
Is it an issue of Kalayim with the
I was wondering about that. I did not see anything immediately on that. I have to do some more checking, but because yes, I would have thought that there is some issue of Kalayim, but the issue of Kalayim is only at a certain distance. And so we can just read this as being that they were sufficient distance away, and yet it seemed that there was still an influence of them on the vineyard.
Uh-huh.
So that's how I'm understanding. Because as far as I understand, yes, I would be worried about Kalayim in all these situations. So I did not see anything in the notes that referenced Kalayim, because obviously if it was Kalayim, there would be a requirement to remove the trees. So it could be that there were fences around, because I think fences will allow distances to be smaller. But yes, you ask a great question, and I don't know the answer definitively, but I believe that we're just going to have to assume that we're talking about sufficient distance.
Okay, what is the maskana above regarding the hefsa versus the gavra in injury? Why would it make a difference which object, whether it's a fist or a stone, injures someone? If the person is injured as a wound on the head, the arm, one has to pay for the nature of the wound, right? I mean, or the time off for the wound. Doesn't matter what hits him or how he hits him or how he fell or how he was pushed.
No, that's the maskana of our Gemara, is that it does matter. That in fact the question is does the object that caused the damage, is that reasonable for causing the damage? So if you were to go up to somebody and be playful and try to tickle them with the feather, and somehow they develop some kind of rash and are out of work for 2 weeks, according to the Torah, you would probably not be liable unless you knew for a fact that they in fact were allergic to the bird feather that you chose. So yeah, I think that's exactly the point in the end. The point is that we don't have liability no matter what. We need to do some kind of evaluation of the object that caused the damage to say, is this in fact an object that could potentially cause that damage? If you throw a rubber ball at somebody and it hits them in the head, and you didn't throw it at a particularly high rate of speed, and yet they get a concussion, again, that's not going to, the classic eggshell skull that you have in case that's discussed in law school all the time. In the end, the Torah is saying, or the Gemara is effectively saying, that you are not liable for that eggshell skull. If the thing that you did is not sufficient to have caused that level of damage.
All right.
So Yishakov, thank you for the question, and we'll pick up again, God willing, tomorrow with the Mishnah on Tzadik Bet Amud Aleph. Have a wonderful day.